I grew up watching my mother press her wedding dress every anniversary, smoothing out wrinkles that had been there for decades, telling me that a good marriage was the one thing worth building your entire life around. I believed her. For 31 years, I believed her completely. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I had spent the better part of a decade constructing a life that looked, from the outside, exactly the way I had always imagined it would. I was a senior architect at one of the most respected firms in Chicago. I had my own apartment on the 23rd floor of a building I had helped design. I had a closet full of clothes that fit, a passport full of stamps, and a fiancé who told me every single morning without fail that I was the most remarkable woman he had ever known. He said it again on the morning of our wedding. I remember that now, and I want you to really sit with it. He looked me in the eyes over the breakfast tray that had been delivered to my bridal suite, squeezed my hand across the white linen, and said it like he meant it. Then he kissed me on the forehead, told me he would see me at the altar in 4 hours, and walked out of my room. He walked directly down 2 floors and into bed with my sister. I did not scream when I found out. I did not cry, did not throw anything, did not call him every name I had ever learned. I picked up my phone, scrolled to a single contact, and made one call that took less than 4 minutes. By the time I walked downstairs to face 220 guests in that ballroom, I had already changed everything. But I should start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. My fiancé and I met at a rooftop fundraiser 6 years before our wedding day. He was charming in the specific way that men who have never been told no tend to be charming, effortless, a little careless with it, as though the attention he drew was a minor inconvenience he had learned to tolerate. He came from money. Old Chicago money, the kind that has a foundation named after it and a wing of a children's hospital with the family name etched in marble. His father sat on 3 corporate boards. His mother chaired the city's most prestigious arts gala every spring. I was not from that world. My father had worked in construction for 30 years and my mother had taught 3rd grade for 25. What I had built myself, through a full scholarship to Northwestern and then 7 years of working harder than anyone else in every room I entered. My fiancé liked that about me, he said. He admired it. I was real in a way that the women he had grown up around were not. My sister was 2 years younger than me and had always been, in the way that these things go in families, the beautiful one. Not that I was not, I want to be precise here, because I spent a lot of time in therapy afterward examining the story I had told myself, and honesty matters more to me now than it ever did before. I was attractive. I was accomplished. But my sister had the kind of face that stopped a conversation, and she had never once in her life had to work as hard as I did to be noticed. She was my maid of honor. We had been close, or I had believed we were close, which I have come to understand is not the same thing at all. She was the first person I called when my fiancé proposed. She was in every engagement photo. She had flown to Italy with me to find my dress, had spent 3 weekends tasting wedding cakes, had held my hand in the car on the way to the venue walkthrough and told me she had never seen me happier. I had never seen myself happier either. The wedding was at the Langham. We had booked the grand ballroom 18 months in advance, 220 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, flowers imported from the Netherlands that had cost more than my first car. It was not just a wedding, and I knew that going in it was also, in the frank language my future father-in-law had used at the rehearsal dinner, a social event. A statement, the merging of my professional reputation with his family's legacy, which made what happened that morning, in retrospect, either the worst possible timing or the best. I had woken up at 6. The ceremony was not until 2 in the afternoon, which gave me 8 full hours that I had scheduled down to the minute hair at 7:30, makeup at 9, photographs with my bridesmaids at 11, first look with my fiancé at 12:30. I had a spreadsheet. I had a day of coordinator named Renata who communicated exclusively in calm, clipped sentences and had never once in 4 years of working with brides lost her composure. I had, in other words, controlled every variable I could control. The one variable I had not accounted for was my sister leaving her earrings in my fiancé's room. She had texted me at 7:53 while I was sitting in the hair chair. "Can you grab my earrings from Jay's suite? I left them there last night after the after-party. You're closer. The gold drops, on the dresser." I had not thought anything of it. The rehearsal dinner had ended in a sweet crawl, half the wedding party bouncing between rooms until midnight, the way these things always do. Of course, she had left earrings somewhere. My sister left things everywhere. I had been finding her belongings in my spaces my entire life. I told my hairdresser I needed 15 minutes, grabbed my key card, and rode the elevator up 3 floors. The door to my fiancé's suite was not fully latched. I noticed that before I noticed anything else, the gap of a 1/4 inch, the latch not quite catching. I pushed it open with 2 fingers. The living room was the way it always looked after a long night. Champagne flutes on the coffee table, a blazer over the back of a chair, someone's shoes near the door. I registered all of that before I registered what I was actually looking at, the way your brain sometimes takes a second to catch up with your eyes when it is processing something it does not want to be true. The shoes near the door were heels. Strappy, gold, the kind my sister had been wearing the night before. I stood very still. I am an architect. I am trained, professionally and temperamentally, to assess a space before I move through it, to read a room before I enter it, to understand what a structure is telling you before you decide what it needs. And standing in the doorway of that suite, looking at those heels, at the blazer that was too small to be his, at the second champagne flute with a lipstick print on the rim, I assessed the situation with a clarity that I still find, when I think about it, almost frightening. I knew before I opened the bedroom door. I opened it anyway, because there was a part of me, the part that had watched my mother press that dress every anniversary, that needed to be absolutely certain. I will not describe what I saw in detail. It does not serve the story, and more importantly, it does not serve me to re-enter that image any more than I already have. What I will tell you is that both of them were there, and that they did not hear me open the door, and that I stood in that doorway for what felt like a very long time but was probably less than 10 seconds before I stepped back, pulled the door closed without making a sound, walked to the chair where the blazer was draped, and picked up my sister's earrings from the pocket of the blazer where she had, evidently, placed them the night before. Then I left. I rode the elevator back down to my floor. I sat on the edge of my bed. The hairdresser knocked on the door at 8:15 and I told her, in a voice I did not entirely recognize as mine, that I needed a few more minutes. She said, of course, she would be right outside. I sat there for a while. I want to be honest about what happened in those minutes because I have seen, in the movies and in the stories people tell, the version where the woman breaks down immediately, where grief swallows her whole before she can do anything else. That is not what happened to me. What happened to me was something colder and more deliberate, like a door in my chest swinging shut on a hinge I had never noticed before. I thought about the 220 people in that hotel. I thought about the 12-piece orchestra and the flowers from the Netherlands. I thought about my mother's dress. Then I stopped thinking about those things and started thinking about what I was actually going to do. I picked up my phone. The contact I scrolled to was not my fiancé. It was not my sister. It was not my mother, who was already in hair and makeup 2 rooms down the hall, and who I was not going to put through this a single second earlier than necessary. It was my attorney. Her name was Margaret, and she had been my personal attorney for 4 years, ever since I had made partner at my firm and needed someone who knew exactly what I was worth and could protect it. We had drawn up a prenuptial agreement 6 months earlier, not because I did not trust my fiancé, I had believed then, but because Margaret had looked at me across her desk and said, very quietly, that smart women protected themselves, full stop, and I had respected her enough to listen. The prenuptial agreement included a fidelity clause. Margaret picked up on the second ring. I told her what I had found. I told her in the same voice I use in client presentations level, factual, precise. She asked me 2 questions. I answered them. She told me she would have paperwork ready by end of day, that I should not sign anything and should not make any financial decisions before speaking with her, and that she was very sorry. Then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, the only thing you have to decide right now is whether you want to walk into that ballroom on your terms or on his. I thanked her and hung up. I let the hairdresser back in. I sat in the chair and I let her finish what she had started, and I watched in the mirror as she wove something beautiful out of the parts of me that were still intact, and I made myself breathe slowly and evenly, and I decided, with every exhale, exactly what the next 4 hours were going to look like. At 11 o'clock, I took photographs with my bridesmaids. My sister was not among them. She had texted at 10:30 saying she was running behind, that she needed another hour. that she was so sorry and would be there soon. I read that text and felt something shift in my stomach, a nausea that had nothing to do with nerves, and I told Renata that we would proceed with the photos we had and pick up the rest later. At 12:15, my fiancé's mother came to find me. She was a woman who had, in the 6 years I had known her, treated me with a specific kind of careful warmth that I now understood, standing in my wedding dress in a hotel hallway, had always been conditional. She was dressed impeccably. She had pearls at her throat. She took both of my hands in hers and looked at my face and said, in a voice pitched too low for anyone else to hear, that whatever I had seen this morning had been a terrible mistake and that it would never happen again, and that the kindest thing for everyone would be to let this day proceed as planned. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the word kindest. I thought about who that word was protecting. I said very gently that I appreciated her coming to me. And then I said that I needed her to go collect her husband and her son and bring them to my suite in the next 10 minutes, because there were some things that needed to be said before I made any decisions about the afternoon. She started to say something. I squeezed her hands and smiled at her. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile I use when a contractor tells me a structural wall is non-load-bearing when I can see with my own eyes that it absolutely is. She went to get them. What happened in my suite in the next 40 minutes is, I think, the part of this story that people find hardest to believe, because it does not match the script. The script says the woman falls apart. The script says the men explain and minimize, and the word mistake gets used so many times it loses all its meaning. The script says the family closes ranks and the woman is left standing outside that circle, holding whatever is left of her. That is not what happened. My future father-in-law arrived first, alone, and he was already composing an argument before he cleared the doorway. I could see it in the set of his jaw, the particular way men who are accustomed to authority arrange their faces when they are about to reframe someone else's reality for them. He got 3 sentences out before I held up one hand. I said, I am not interested in the explanation. I am interested in the outcome. And the outcome is that your son has voided the fidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement, which my attorney is already aware of, which means this is no longer a personal matter, it is a legal one. You can speak to Margaret directly if you have questions about the specifics. The air in the room changed. I watched him recalibrate. My fiancé came in next, and I will tell you that the look on his face when he saw me composed, dressed, in full makeup, sitting in a chair like I was conducting a meeting was something I will carry with me for a long time. He had expected devastation. He had prepared for devastation. He did not know what to do with calm. He started with the word sorry. I stopped him there too. I said, I don't need you to be sorry right now. I need you to understand what is happening. Margaret has the documentation. Your father's legal team will be hearing from her today. What I am deciding, in the next few minutes, is whether I walk into that ballroom and address our guests directly, or whether I let you do it. Those are the options. There is no third option where we proceed with this wedding. My mother arrived because I had texted her while I was waiting for them a single sentence. Come to my room. I need you. Do not tell anyone. She came in to find her future son-in-law sitting on the edge of a hotel ottoman looking like a man who had just watched the ground shift under him. And she looked at me, and she read my face the way only mothers can, and she sat down next to me without saying a word and put her hand on my knee. My father arrived 8 minutes later, and this is the part I want to describe carefully because it matters. My father is 63 years old and spent 30 years in construction and has the hands and the posture of a man who has moved weight his entire life. He walked into that room, looked at my fiancé, looked at my future father-in-law, and the expression on his face was not rage, it was something quieter than rage and much more final. He and my future father-in-law had met a dozen times over the course of 6 years. They had shaken hands at the rehearsal dinner the night before. My future father-in-law started to speak. My father said, with a patience that was somehow more devastating than any raised voice, I suggest you stop right there. The silence in that room lasted a long time. My future father-in-law is a man who serves on 3 corporate boards and has a wing of a children's hospital with his name on it. He is not accustomed to being told to stop. He looked at my father across that hotel suite, and I watched something pass between them, not words, not an argument, just the simple, terrible clarity of two men who both understood that one of them had raised a son who had destroyed something irreplaceable, and that no amount of money or social standing or carefully composed apologies was going to change what that meant. My future father-in-law sat down. My father came and stood behind my chair. He put one hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything else to the room. He did not need to. We spent 20 more minutes working out the logistics. Renata would go downstairs and inform the guests, on my behalf, that the ceremony would not be taking place due to unforeseen circumstances. I had written 4 sentences in my phone's notes app while I was waiting for everyone to arrive, direct, dignified, nothing that required explanation or invited speculation. I read them to the room and asked if anyone had objections. No one did. My fiancé asked, once, if there was anything he could say. I told him that there wasn't, not because I was punishing him, though I want to be honest. There was a satisfaction in that moment that I am not ashamed of, but because anything he said at that point would have been for his benefit and not for mine, and I had decided, somewhere between the elevator and Margaret's phone call, that I was done arranging my responses around other people's comfort. I want to talk about my sister, because she is the part of this that people ask about most. She had come to my suite at 11:45, after the photographs, and she had stood in my doorway in her bridesmaid dress with her hair done and her eyes already wet, and she had started with the word sorry, too. I had let her finish. She said it had happened once before, 6 months ago. That she had ended it. That she had been trying to find a way to tell me. That she had been living with the guilt of it for half a year. That she loved me. That she didn't know how it had started. That she was so sorry. I listened to all of it. I let her say everything she needed to say. Then I said, I believe that you're sorry. I think you're genuinely sorry. And I need you to understand that it doesn't matter. Not right now. What you did to me, not just this, but 6 months of looking me in the face and saying nothing is not something I can process in a hotel room in my wedding dress on what was supposed to be my wedding day. So here is what is going to happen. You're going to go downstairs with everyone else. You're going to be present for what comes next. And then you and I are going to not speak for a while, and when we do speak, it is going to be on my timeline, not yours. She cried. I watched her cry, and I felt something that I still do not have an exact word for, not coldness exactly, not indifference, but a kind of exhausted clarity, like the moment after a very long storm, when the air is suddenly perfectly still, and you can see, for the first time in hours, exactly how far the water has risen. I straightened my dress and went downstairs. Renata had been extraordinary. The guests were assembled in the ballroom, the orchestra sitting quietly in the corner, the flowers from the Netherlands arranged on every surface with a precision that felt, in that moment, almost unbearably beautiful. 220 people turned when I walked in, and the sound in that room shifted into something I had not prepared for, a collective intake of breath, the way people sound when they understand, without having been told yet, that something has gone wrong. I walked to the front of the room. I did not use a microphone. I did not need one. I said, "Thank you all for being here. I know that many of you have traveled a long way to be in this room today, and I want you to know that your presence has meant everything to me. I also want to be honest with you, because you deserve honesty. The wedding will not be happening today. I made this decision this morning, and I made it clearly, and I am at peace with it. I am not going to ask you to take sides or assign blame publicly. What I will ask is that you raise your glass with me, because I am still the same woman you came here to celebrate, and my life is still worth celebrating, and I would very much like a drink." There was a beat of silence. Then someone in the back, I found out later it was my college roommate, who had flown in from Portland and who I have adored for 11 years, started to clap. The reception happened anyway, not as a wedding reception, but as something harder to name and more honest than that. The orchestra played. People ate. My father danced with me to a song we had rehearsed for the father-daughter dance, and he held me the way he had when I was small and frightened of things, and I let myself lean into him for exactly one song before I straightened my spine and went back to being the woman I had decided to be in that hotel suite. My fiancé's family left within the first hour. His father had said something, briefly. To my father near the door, I did not hear the words, only saw the exchange from across the room. My father listening with his arms crossed and then nodding once, very slightly, The way he nods when he has made a decision that he will not revisit. His mother paused near me on the way out and started to say something, and I told her, quietly, that I hoped we could both remember this version of ourselves in the months ahead because the legal process was going to be uncomfortable for everyone, and grace was going to matter. She left without responding. I watched her go and felt something settle in my chest. The fidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement, as Margaret had explained to me during a very long call 3 days later, was comprehensive. It covered assets accumulated jointly during the engagement period, which included a property we had put an offer on together in Lincoln Park, an investment account we had opened in both our names, and a deposit on a firm partnership buy-in that had been partially funded by a gift from his parents to us as a couple. Margaret was, as she always is, methodical and thorough and several moves ahead of the other side. She had sent a letter to his family's attorneys before the business day ended on what should have been our wedding day. His father had called me directly. Once, 2 weeks later, he wanted to discuss a settlement. I forwarded his number to Margaret and did not pick up again. I want to tell you something about the months that followed, because the story does not end in that ballroom, and pretending otherwise would be a disservice to everyone who has ever had to live in the long, unglamorous aftermath of a moment like that one. I went back to work the following Monday. I took on a project I had been circling for 2 years, a community arts center on the South Side, pro bono, the kind of work that reminded me why I became an architect in the first place. I was not fine. I want to be honest about that too. I had moments of grief that were physical, that woke me up at 2 in the morning with a weight on my chest that took a long time to identify as loss, not just for him, not just for her, but for the version of myself that had believed, with her whole heart, that she had gotten it right. My therapist, who I started seeing 6 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, said something in our 3rd session that I wrote down and kept. She said, "The story you tell yourself about what happened will determine who you become after it. Make sure you're telling the true version. The true version is this: I was betrayed by 2 people I loved. I responded with more composure than I knew I had. I protected myself legally and financially because I had been smart enough, 6 months earlier, to listen to a woman who told me that smart women protect themselves. I did not burn anything down. I did not say things in public that I would have to reckon with later. I walked into a room full of people who had come to watch me become someone's wife, and instead I showed them what I looked like when I decided to remain my own person. I do not know what my fiancé is doing now. That is true, and it is also intentional. My sister and I spoke for the first time 7 months after the wedding, a phone call that lasted 2 hours and resolved nothing and resolved everything simultaneously, in the way that only conversations between people who share a lifetime of history can. We are not where we were. I do not know if we will ever be where we were. But we are in contact, which is more than I could have told you at month 2, and I believe, on most days, that it is enough for now. What I know for certain is this: I still work on the 23rd floor of the building I helped design. I still have a passport full of stamps and a closet full of clothes that fit. I had dinner last month with Margaret, who told me over a very good bottle of wine that the settlement had been finalized and that I should allow myself to feel good about that, and I told her that I already did. I still have my mother's phone number saved as Mom, which sounds obvious until you have spent enough time in the particular loneliness of being the child who keeps their family together, and then you understand why it matters that the word is still warm when you see it. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, in the early morning before the building wakes up, I sit in my apartment on the 23rd floor and look out at the city I live in and the city I helped build, and I think about the woman who sat on the edge of a hotel bed in a wedding dress and chose, in the space between one breath and the next, not to fall apart. I think she made the right call.